Our very respected Tirumeni, Core Episcopa, Ajans, Chemachas, and my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Sheila George from St. Peter's Cathedral family. I have the privilege of introducing one of our speakers, Dr. Vinaya Rajan. Vinaya was a member of one of our sister churches, St. Mary's White Plains, before marrying our very own Rabbi Rajan. Vinaya completed her PhD in developmental and biological psychology at Virginia Tech in 2012. After completing her doctoral degree, she obtained a visiting assistant professor position at Rajan University, where she taught courses in lifespan developmental psychology, biological psychology, and critical thinking. She is currently working as a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Delaware as a part of the Institute of Education Sciences Training Fellowship. Her research examines developmental changes in brain-behavior relations in infancy and early childhood, and specifically focuses on the development of early learning and memory skills. She has published several research articles in the leading developmental psychology and has contributed to a book chapter in Oxford Handbook of Cognitive Psychology on these particular topics.
Thank you. Respected, beloved Tirumeni, Corpus Lopus, Uchins, deacons, parents, and brothers and sisters. My talk today is titled Examining the Teen Years, Promoting Healthy Adolescent Development. And I'm going to be talking about this from a psychological perspective. And mainly, what I want to discuss is how you, as parents, what can you do to make sure that your children grow up healthy, happy, and how they can turn into successful adults. So that is going to be the focus of today's talk. So if you're not familiar with the term adolescent, what does that mean? It is a developmental time period. So you can see that adolescence, it lies between childhood and adulthood. And this is important. Knowing what this means is important to understanding adolescent behavior. This is a transitional period, meaning that adolescents are no longer children, but they're not quite yet adults. There's so much tremendous physical change, biological change, psychological change that happens during this period in development. And we as parents, or you as parents, need to be mindful of that this is a transitional period. So just out of curiosity, you can see what the age range is, right? So it's starting at 10 to 12 years and ending from 18 to 21 years. So just show of hands, how many of you have teenagers right now? How many of you have teenagers that fall into this age range? Perfect. How many of you have children that are a little bit younger, maybe 10 and under? Okay, so this will be relevant for you, and there are several parents here where this will hit home, so pay attention. And also, for those of you who have adult children, you can maybe inform us about this conversation, and even think back to when your adults were teenagers and what you went through, so everyone can contribute today. So I have this statement up. The teenage years. This is a time of storm and stress. And I just want to get your thoughts. So how many of you would agree with this statement? Teenagers, time of stress. Okay, almost everyone's hand went up. So it's interesting that you think about that, because when you think about the newspaper articles or the media presentations, TV shows, all of them discuss adolescence as a negative portrayal. And I want to tell you today that this is false. So those negative stereotypes that we have about adolescence just is not true. So the media and newspapers, they have us think that all teenagers are going to join gangs, they're going to drink and have psychological and substance abuse addictions, and that's just not the case. Most teenagers, they make the transition into adolescence very successfully. A lot of them are very successful in school. They are attached to their family, they are involved in their community, and most of them do not have problems with substance abuse or with violent behavior. So that's the good news, right? Hopefully that should make you all feel relieved and feel good. But then we also know that there are risks that happen in the adolescent years. And so that's really what I am going to be talking about today. So just due to time restraints, I'm going to focus today on substance use and abuse, because I think that is very relevant. Social media, because I think that's something that can be very informative to you as parents if you're not very familiar with various aspects of social media. And then I'm going to skip delinquency, and I will talk about adolescent depression and suicide, just because coming from this psychological perspective, I think in our community we do not focus on mental health issues, and I think that is a problem. So these are the topics that I will cover. If you want to know about delinquency, you can feel free to talk to me after, and we can talk about that, but I'm sorry to say I will skip over that today. So, I'm going to start talking about substance use and abuse. And as parents, you need to know what the current trends are. What is happening in the world of teenage drug abuse today? And so if you look at the rates, the United States has one of the highest rates of adolescent drug use compared to all other nations. And that's a very, very startling statistic. So we know that this is a problem here in the US. But there is some good news. So there is a decline in some of these trends. So this is showing you alcohol consumption. And you can see here, it's very high some 30 years ago. In the 1980s, almost every high school senior had tried alcohol at some point. But you can see here in the 2000s that alcohol consumption rate is declining. So that's good news. We're going in the right direction. And the same thing is true for cigarette use. So you can see in this graph, it's kind of hard to see, but the orange line shows us the trend of cigarette use. In the 1990s, 1996, 1997, cigarette use was at the highest peak. And from there, it's been a steady downward trend, which is also good. And the flip side of that, what are the current risks now. You can see the blue line, this is showing marijuana use. Marijuana use is on the increased trend. So more and more teenagers are now thinking and trying and experimenting with marijuana. So you as parents need to know that this is a health risk. Other health risks that you probably are not aware of, prescription drug abuse. This is huge. This is a huge problem now among teenagers. So teenagers, it's easy access. They can go into their parents' medicine cabinet, get a painkiller prescription. This is a powerful narcotic. So they're getting these drugs from easy access in their own homes, in a medicine counter, and they are becoming addicted to these drugs. So this is another huge growing problem and growing trend. And so I think as parents, this is important for you to know what are the trends, what are the dangers that our teenagers are now facing. And so this graph I wanted to, now that I've scared you all, this graph I wanted to include as a way to encourage you, to give you some hope. Because if you ask teenagers, what influences your decision to drink alcohol, whether or not you will drink alcohol, you can see here, it's parents above every other thing, any other influence. Parents are the ones that can influence whether or not their teenagers are going to engage in substance use. Over and above their friends, over and above the TV shows that they're watching, over and above their siblings or their teachers. So you control that influence. It's really up to you. And so what can you as parents do to help with these substance abuse issues? So if you look at the psychological research, many of the studies say that if you live in a family context where you fight all the time, you argue, where you treat each other badly if there's physical abuse, that increases the risk of drug and alcohol abuse. So the flip side of that, you as parents, you need to be warm and supporting, having that warm, supportive environment. So you should talk to your kids about what they're interested in. Maybe volunteer together, be engaged in these extracurricular activities, cook dinner together. And this is hard as parents, but low levels of anger and low levels of emotion are important when you're talking to your children. You don't want to do these things in an accusatory tone. The other things that we know, parents, you are role models for your children. So what you do when it comes to alcohol and drugs and abuse, that behavior gets modeled to your children. So your children are going to mimic your healthy behaviors and your unhealthy behaviors. So this means that if you as parents choose to drink alcohol, it should be small amounts. You shouldn't be intoxicated in front of your children. And then the other thing is, children are picking up on how you as a parent handles stress. So if you come home after a long day of work and you say, I need to have a glass of wine, or I need to drink this tonight because I have had such a stressful day. What you're doing is you're telling your children that alcohol is a coping mechanism for stress. And so you really need to be careful about the behavior that you're modeling to your children. You are their role models. Other things, there are certain issues that make children at an increased risk for these abuse issues. So there is some research that suggests that there might be a genetic component to alcoholism. So if alcoholism runs in your family, you might be inheriting that. The other thing is if your children suffer from depression or anxiety or attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder, those things put them at increased risk as well. And then another thing I want to talk about is just traumatic experiences too. So being a victim of physical or sexual abuse, or being in a car accident, or witnessing a natural disaster, any kind of trauma that a child experiences, that puts them at an increased risk too. So you as a parent, you need to know what these risk factors are. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you monitor who your children are interacting with. You can control and set those limits. So you should know who your children's friends are. You should know their household, what type of household they're being raised in, and what the rules that their friends' parents set for them. These are things that you should know, and you should be engaged in your children and talk to them. One of the reasons why teens choose to drink is because they think all their other friends are drinking too. It's this false perception. And we know that's not the case. We know that not very few teens are abusing alcohol. So you need to remind your children that most teenagers don't drink, and most teenagers don't use drugs regularly. So you need to talk to them. And then I am going to ask, just how many of you, just raise your hands, all of you that have teenagers now, how many of you sat down and had a one-to-one discussion about the dangers of drugs with your children? Okay. Some little, maybe. I mean, I think this whole room should go up, right? I mean, this is the problem. Having an ongoing, if parents are the biggest influence, then parents need to sit down and talk about the dangers of drugs and alcohol to their children. And the best way that you can do it is not to lecture, not like how I'm doing now. The best thing that you can do is state it like a health concern. So you would tell your kids, okay, make sure you eat vegetables, eat fruits, eat healthy, make sure you exercise, right? Healthy behaviors. So you need to talk to your children as a health concern. And the more that your children perceive these drugs as a risk, that's going to be the biggest influence on whether they will choose to engage in these drugs. And I think, and I want to go back to this slide, this is showing, remember, cigarettes are on the decline. Well, think about what's been happening in the media. I mean, cigarette smoking is a taboo now. You know, we know about the dangers. We know that it's linked to lung cancer, and we know that it's linked to heart disease, and we know all of the problems with cigarette smoking. And I think that does play a big role in why it's decreasing. Now, marijuana. Most teenagers do not know about the bad effects, the side effects of marijuana, and they don't think it's dangerous. And that is why these marijuana rates are increasing. So you need to talk to your children as a health concern. Here are the problems with these drugs, the long-term side effects, and think about it from that perspective. And that seems to be the best method. So I also do want to talk about social media. This might be something that's a bit of a mystery to some parents here. So I thought this would be fun. So how many of you, just a show of hand, know what Facebook is? Okay, so some. Anyone have any parents here have Facebook accounts? Okay, so that's good. All right, so what about Twitter? Okay, how about Instagram? You're all staring at me like, what does this mean? These are things, I guarantee these are things that your children are using. These are sites that they have accounts on, that they have profiles on, that they probably use every day. So here's a statistic for you. 22% of teenagers, they log onto their favorite social websites more than 10 times a day. And for those of you that have teenagers, you probably believe that, right? They're always on their computers, their internet, and they're always kind of interacting on these various forms of social media. So this is something that's heavily influential in your teenagers' lives. So what I will say to you is, if you're concerned about their social media use, you need to know what the technology is. You need to know why they're on Facebook. Why are they on Twitter? What are these sites? What are they doing? Are they primarily using this to just communicate with their friends? Maybe they're getting homework assignments from friends online. What's the reasoning behind them wanting these accounts? And you need to be on top of that. If this is a concern from you, then you need to know what this technology is. And so some of the risks involved in social media, there are different levels. I'll talk about two. The first one is called cyberbullying. So this is a risk between peers, from teenager to teenager. And a growing trend here in the United States is that some teens, they are using these social media platforms to bully other people. They leave threatening messages. They spread gossip. They spread rumors. And it's this online form of harassment. And this is a huge problem because those children that are victimized, they have increased rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicide attempts. So this is a huge risk here. If you think that this bullying is a concern, then you really need to make sure that you intervene, have them log off of their social media contacts, get the school involved. I mean, this is a huge concern now. The other thing is privacy concerns. So children are posting photos, inappropriate messages, things that they think are funny jokes now, and they don't realize that the inappropriate things that they're posting can have a consequence in the future. So 10 years down the line, if a college admissions officer searches that profile and they see all these bad photos, or a future employer sees all these bad photos, that can determine whether they get into that school or they get that job. And teenagers do not think that way. They don't think about the future consequences. So you really need to talk to your children about this online reputation. So tell them, walk them through how they can limit the privacy of their profiles. And tell them about the online dangers. And again, get to know the technology, because that's the only way that you can really understand why they are engaging in these social media sites. And again, I'm sorry I can't talk about this today, but the last thing that I'll talk about, and I'm going to keep this short, but is mental health. Because especially in our Malayali community, there is such a stigma towards mental health issues. We are embarrassed to talk about it. We are ashamed to talk about it. We don't want to think about depression, anxiety issues. We don't want to even think about going into therapy. I mean, these are all taboo topics. And that is, we need to change the way that we think about this. If you have a medical ailment, if you are diagnosed with cancer, or if you are diagnosed with diabetes, you will go to the doctor and seek treatment. This is the same exact thing. Depression is a biological issue. It is a physical ailment, a physical condition. It is nothing to be embarrassed about. It is nothing to be shunned or ashamed about. And you need, as parents, you need to take this seriously. Because I think out of all of these topics, I think this is going to be the most relevant to you and your teenagers. Depression is one of the leading psychological disorders among adolescents, and the same thing with suicide rates. So this is something that we really need to take seriously as a community. And you can see here, this is just showing you the rates of depression. And I'm not going to walk through this chart, but one of the things that I do want to point out is that the rates of depression are higher among females, and this is always a consistent finding. So young girls are at a higher risk of depression. So this is a risk factor. This is something that parents need to take into consideration, especially parents of daughters. And you need to be aware of the warning signs. So how do I know if my child is depressed? And so these are just walking through some of them, and you can read through this, but feeling sad, if your child is talking about suicide, you need to take that seriously. And you can see there if there's a marked decline in performance, so if their grades are dropping, if they don't care, if they were involved in all these clubs and activities that they loved, and then all of a sudden they just drop everything and quit everything. So that's a big one. Failing to engage in previously pleasurable activities or interacting with friends, abusing substances. These are all warning signs that your child might be depressed. And so, and again, take away the stigma. Just like you would if you had cancer or diabetes, you would seek treatment. Seeking treatment is important. It is the most effective. So what we know is that depression is due to this chemical imbalance. It's a biological condition. And so there are medications out there that can help. They've been proven to be very successful. And then therapy too, psychotherapy. The best treatment involves a combination of two. So doing both medication and therapy. That seems to be the most successful in treating depression. So these are things that you need, as parents, you need to keep in mind. And then I do want to also talk about adolescent suicide. You can see here that it has tripled over the last 30 years. It is the third leading cause of death among teenagers after motor vehicle accidents and homicides. So third leading cause of death. And you can see here, I mean, the statistics are staggering. One suicide attempt every 90 minutes. I mean, this is a huge health concern among the U.S. And the statistics aren't even as verifiable because there's so many more suicide attempts than actual successful suicides. So that number is probably even bigger than what I'm reporting right now. And so you can see here that females are more likely to try to commit suicide, and males are more successful. That's what this is showing you, that males are actually more successful at committing suicide than what you see in females. And so what I would say is parents know what the warning signs are about suicide. If your children are saying things like, oh, well, I won't be around much longer, or I wish I were dead. I mean, that's a huge warning sign. If they have difficulties in school, if they have missed classes, if their grades have dropped, if they have changed their eating habits. And then the thing that you need to do as parents is know that you need to intervene. You need to take those threats seriously. So don't keep them secret. Don't keep them to yourself. Make sure if someone comes up with you and says that they have these suicidal thoughts, you need to talk to them. You need to see how serious they are about this. You know, have they planned it out? Have they thought about this? Do they know what they want to do? And don't challenge them. Don't confront them. You just need to make sure that you convey that you are there for them, that you care, that you are a resource for them. And, one of the things, I don't want to end this on kind of this negative note. A lot of the protective factors, you see parents are a huge protective factor, right? So if parents are involved in their children's lives, high levels of monitoring, if they're successful in school and they're actively engaged, if they have these social activities, all of those things decrease the risk of drug abuse, decrease the risk of violent behaviors, delinquency. And one of the things that I wanted to end on is the role of spirituality. I mean, we're here today to learn about spirituality and family life. And unfortunately, in the psychological literature at least, there's not a lot of scientific evidence where they look at the role of religion. You know, what role does religion and church and spiritual life have on adolescent health and development? But what I will tell you is that you are in the right steps because you are active in church and you are raising your children up to be Christian. So what we know is that kids that are involved in the church, if they go to religious services, if they are involved in public prayer, or if they're involved in youth groups, these children are less likely to smoke cigarettes, they're less likely to use alcohol and marijuana, they have a higher sense of self-esteem, and they have more positive family relationships. And so I think we also need to think about not just as the role of parents, but what role as a church. How can we also, as a community, church community, promote these healthy adolescent behaviors to make sure that our teens are growing into successful adults. So that is all I had for today. And I did want to open up the floor to anyone if you have questions about anything. Yes?
Do you have any specific data on Asian kids attempting suicide?
So the problem with a lot of these national statistics is that they, a lot of them are from white normative samples. But I will tell you that usually what you find is that the rates, at least of like violent behavior and the rates of drug abuse, not sure about suicide, but typically it's lower among Asian families. Yeah. Yes.
Did we also give a guideline on what is invasion of privacy? I mean, when a child is looking at it, they consider as an invasion of privacy or freedom of privacy in a classification into age groups.
So what does invasion of privacy mean? Or
yeah.
Well, what I mean by the privacy concern is So there are things that you as parents can do to make sure that you are monitoring the websites that your children are looking at, make sure that they're not going on these inappropriate sites, so you can filter out those settings, so you can filter out the internet settings, you can filter out the Facebook privacy settings so that not everyone has open public access to their own information. And if you want, I mean, you're the parent, so you can control the ground rules. If you want to tell your teenager, here, this is a public laptop, this is going to be in the living room, and you can use it, but you have to use it in an open space. That's a good idea to help kind of monitor, increase the monitor. If they're going into their bedroom, you can't really monitor what they're doing. So you can set the ground rules, and you can also say, homework comes first, and then you can have a half hour a night on the internet, and that's about it. It's really the parents. You are driving and putting the rules in place.
You can also ask to share the password of the teenager.
Yes, exactly, too. So sometimes you can set up kind of a shared account so that you know what your children's passwords are. In terms of how to convince them, I might not be the best person to tell you how to do that, but that's an option.
I mean, I know they get over it.
Yeah. So that's a great suggestion, too. Okay, well, I just wanted to say thank you for your time today.